This is a DumTeeDum production.
This is DumTeeDum Live, a special extra podcast about the Archers and the goings-on at the Academic Archers Conference 2025. I'm Stephen Bowden, and if everything in the countryside is trying to kill me, it's going to have to up its game.
And I'm Jacqueline Berto, wise, loving and fun. And with us we have two lovely studio guests. Would you like to introduce yourselves, ladies?
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm Dr. Cara Courage, and I'm co-founder, organiser of Academic Archers.
Welcome.
And I'm Claire Astbury, Houses-in-both-Parishes, and a long-time caller-innerer as Claire from Clapham on DumTeeDum.
Welcome to both. Welcome both of you to the DumTeeDum studio. We're not here to talk about last week in Ambridge because we did that on the regular podcast, but instead we're going to talk more generally about the programme and also about this year's Academic Archers Conference. So can I ask each of you in turn to say what has been your highlight of the conference so far? Claire, I know you haven't been able to attend every single bit of it.
Yeah, so I would say I could only stay for a short time yesterday because I was at a family do. And in some ways it was useful the conference was online this year. Otherwise I might not have made it at all because I couldn't be in both Horsham and Warwick at the same time. But what I would say is, as ever, I love Jill's turn of phrase in the opening Loves and Loathes. I especially enjoyed watching Cara's face whilst Jill was doing her turns of phrase. I also enjoyed watching Lou arguing with the cat. I know that was a bit of a distraction, but it was an enjoyable one. What I would say is I'm so glad that the whole thing has been recorded because the thing that I was particularly looking forward to hearing, and I am looking forward to seeing on a record sometime, was Jane Jacobs' paper on department stores and regional department stores because they're places that are part of a collective social history and that are being lost left, right and centre without a huge amount of obvious grieving. And I think we will look back on the last sort of 10, 15 years and kind of understand what we lost in the retail environment. And I think I'd be very curious to hear. I mean, back in the day, I live in Bedford, we had two department stores, Beals and Debenhams. Beals died sometime in the 90s. My grandma used to work at the haberdashery at Beals when she was in her younger days, and I was a child. And that went down, and then obviously Debenhams went down. And I don't think there's a department store in the whole of Bedfordshire now, actually, unless there's a sort of big out-of-town Marks and Spencer's in Biggleswade. So that is what I'm really curious to hear. I'm really looking forward to coming back to that. And I'll be interested to see what people's reflections on that was.
It was a very good talk, I thought.
Yeah, very comprehensive. And I think a lot of people in the chat it really sparked memories of the department stores of their youths because, as you say, they don't really exist anymore. I know in Grimsby, my local town, when I was a child, there were two department stores, and we used to go there for school uniform. We used to go there for a treat from the delicatessen if mother was feeling flush, and lots of people had memories, and people who lived in the same areas mentioned names of places that they had been to as children. I agree with you. James' talk was very interesting, very evocative. And yes, we hear very little of life in that department store. Nobody works there for a start.
So, Jacqueline, what's your favourite been so far?
Well, as you probably know, Stephen, because you know me quite well and my tastes in the Archers, I'm not a great fan of meeting the actors and interviews with the actors. I'm one of those people who prefers to keep my mind clear of what they really look like. But I loved Friday evening. I thoroughly enjoyed participating in and watching the recording of One Stiletto in the Grave. I mean, when we were in Birmingham, several of us were there when they were included in recording. So it was a real throwback to that. I love that. And seeing Angus Stobie, who, as I say, I'm not a fan of looking at what they look like, the actors. I was shocked by his scalped head. Made me think, what on earth is he up to? That jail has not been good to him. And also, Jackie Lai was not at all how I imagined, although her voice was exactly Joy's voice, which was wonderful. So that to me was very good. Plus, Stephen, your Tangle had a bit of a starring role for me because she was on your lap for some of the time, and I only ever hear her.
We've had quite a lot of cats featuring on there, including Emma Freud's and whose was the enormous marmalade cat that.
Wasn't Lou's? No, Lou's is black, isn't it?
No, it was. I've now forgotten the name. I'm sure somebody's probably putting it in the chat as we speak. Jack. It was Jack's.
Yeah, brilliant. Lots of cats in the Archers. I mean, my dogs would have loved to have joined us, but they'd love to be here now. They're now locked 2 floors down from here because they would be whining at the door. It's the wrong time of day for them.
And Cara, I mean, for you, it must be the fact that this whole thing has been such a brilliant success, and it's all come together so brilliantly. But were there some specific highlights?
There always are, and I think you're right. Jane James's paper is going to go down into academic Archers canon for us. It's really brought in a new perspective and was just done so brilliantly. Seeing this whole process through, there's a highlight in how many new people we had presenting this year, which is always great to have new faces join us. So we had Vic, Lucy, Sue, Alex, Jane that we've mentioned already, and Julie, and they all just presented so well, and it was just lovely to have them. And I think a paper for me that's really going to stand the test of time, when you think back on your favourites, your highlights would be Lou Gilly's paper on being child-free by choice. It's Lou's field of work, so she's obviously got absolute command of this as a subject, and she presented with this real fairness and this real empathy. And of course, that's exactly what she concluded that the script writers had done as well in writing that storyline. But that was a fantastic paper. Absolutely relished it.
Yeah, I agree. I thought Lou was absolutely spot on. It was extremely interesting. I've got some younger family members who've made the very definite decision not to have children, and in conversation with them, sometimes intense, sometimes light-hearted, I thought Lou had really touched a nerve there.
I'm not saying this to curry favour with Claire, but I thought the climate change session that we kicked off with was really, really good. I mean, it's a subject that I really care about. I care a great deal about, and all 3 papers I thought were very good in terms of identifying who within Ambridge might play what role in terms of the fight against climate, which was Claire's paper, and the one about the EV charging station, because this has been something that we've been talking a lot about on DumTeeDum and waiting for it to be a big issue. And I think that the reason it's realistic that it hasn't really moved forward very much, because I think the key thing which came up in that paper was the need for the electrical infrastructure. And if they're going to have fast charging stations, they need to have a special high voltage supply, 600 volts, I think it was that they were saying, which isn't normal. And you would have to have that built in, presumably all the way from the nearest electrical substation. So I found that a really good set of papers covering what I personally think is one of the most important topics anybody can be discussing in any circumstance.
Absolutely. And I'd love to take this opportunity to add something that I kind of meant to say yesterday and forgot, which is the way that the campaigning about the water company reflects some of the themes of my paper. So they are doing an environmental protest as such, and there has been some mention about how climate change will drive bigger weather events that might cause this sort of flooding or damage again. But what's interesting here is that they've all become very agitated. But actually, no one's really saying the solution to this is that we all cut our carbon. And when you look at the different dynamics there's the kind of the cohorts of people in the village who are going to be motivated by preserving our beautiful countryside. That's your backbone conservatives, your established liberals and so on. Oh, we like the countryside. We want to protect the countryside. We like environmental things that are about our locality and how beautiful and green it is and blah, blah, blah. We don't want sewage coming up through our pipes. That's fair enough. No one wants that. And then people like Emma and others, actually, some of the sentiment has been not especially about we don't like countryside despoiled, or we want to be better at climate readiness, which is what this is also about. It's about saying, oh, that big bad capitalist water company gives all the money to shareholders and haven't invested in the infrastructure. Now, that is also a very realistic and, tangible thing that people should and can protest about. But actually, it's not really... It's not as such an environmental protest, and it's certainly not a climate protest. So we're getting a bit tangled up here between what is a kind of, protest about kind of extractive capitalism, a protest about environmental protection and regulation, and a protest about environmental impact and climate readiness. And actually, of all of those things, the least we've heard about is climate change and climate readiness. In all of this. So in the last several weeks, when I've been rapidly rewriting all my paper because everyone suddenly became an activist, actually I've been reflecting on that and thinking, well, no one's really saying the solution to this is we should all cut our carbon. They're saying the water companies shouldn't be such awful people, which I entirely understand, but it isn't quite the same. And the differentiation between different types of people, as I identified in the paper, some of the way they're coming at this issue reflects that kind of the motivation to the background that they bring to it in those different categories. So if anything, it helps to demonstrate some of the truth of those alongside the fact that they're all clubbing together to protest.
I think one of the solutions to the problems of all these problems is actually the beavers. And it was interesting that farmers who are these guardians of the land and really, the David Archers of this world, who would say that farmers are good for the land, and yet he's massively anti-beaver because supposedly they cause flooding, and yet the only flood we have had is the flood of sewage from Borchester Water. And it was nobody actually really mentioned the beavers. In fact, they came up in the department store session because I think somebody was suggesting that maybe Underwood's had a pet department the way Harrods used to, and perhaps Kirsty and Rex could have got hold of a beaver from there rather than going to all the trouble of going to this dodgy Neo chat.
I really feel your pain, Claire, on having to rewrite your paper. There's always one every year that a paper comes in, and then suddenly, just before conference, the storyline on that particular subject really accelerates. And you're having to frantically rewrite what you're going to say or how you're going to frame something. But that reflection back is really interesting. And I think me listening to your paper as well is that there's a difference between kind of the activism of something that impacts you on the day to day, and then the activism which happens on that bigger, larger macro scale. And there's going to be a tipping point for all of us, isn't there, when the two things really join up? And it'd be really interesting with what the script writers have to balance as a public broadcaster about how they weave those two things in together.
Absolutely.
So, before we talk any further about the conference, let's find out a bit more about the two of you and your views on the inhabitants of Ambridge. Claire, you've discovered that Cara is spending a night in Ambridge and you think she should go for a drink in the Bull with one of the locals. Who are you going to encourage to go and meet her, and why them?
Okay, so we discovered in our just previous chat that obviously Cara, like many of us, is a massive fan of Brad, but I'll be honest, Cara's a marvellous, talented and multifaceted woman and would completely freak him out and intimidate him, I feel. I don't think Brad is ready for Cara.
Scary.
So in Brad's own interests, I think I would keep him a little bit back until he's matured a little. What I would suggest is Stella, because... Not Pip, unless Cara's one of those random Pip fans, because I don't think so.
Absolutely not.
There are a handful out there, but I'm not one of them. I just think Stella's a really interesting character. She knows who she is. She knows what she wants. She handles kind of Brian and all of his kind of, retrenched sort of kind of I know best quite well. I think she's sort of an interesting character with a background. And I know that, Cara grew up in a farming community, but Stella didn't, but has come to appreciate farming. So I think there's something that they would have in common there.
How do you feel about an evening in the Bull with Stella, Cara?
I would love an evening in the Bull with Stella. I'm glad you didn't say Brad, because I'd be the only one drinking, which would make for a very one-sided evening. I absolutely adore Stella, and it's always interesting when a new character comes into the village, just the mirror that they show up to the other characters. I was really bemused that she went for Pip as a choice of a partner. But yeah, I agree. I love the way that she holds the line with Brian and is really proving herself to be like, I can manage this. Thank you very much. It's what you employed me to do, and I'm going to do it. So yeah, thank you very much for that. That'd be a great night out.
Okay, now let's turn the tables round. And Cara, who are you going to arrange for Claire to meet?
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, Claire.
Oh, dear.
You've been really kind to me, but I'm going to suggest that you have an evening out with Ruth. When I think of Claire Astbury, I think of the Ambridge housing fairy, which you've talked about a lot in the past and expertly. And I think you've got an opportunity there for all of us to get the definitive, drawing on the back of the napkin of the actual layout of the farm there and their rooms and so on and so forth. And I think that for all of us, I'm asking you to take that one for the team, actually, just so we can actually finally get the definitive.
I don't really mind Ruth, actually. I think I'm not a Ruth hater like some people are. I think she gets quite short shrift from a lot of people. So I think she's okay. Although I do absolutely believe that Oliver Sterling is the original Ambridge fairy, because he's pulled stuff out of the hat for all sorts of, mainly Grundy-related people in the past. So as far as the Grundy is concerned, Oliver is the fairy of all types. But I could do an evening with Ruth. I don't mind that.
I think that's great. I think you could probably get along with Ruth. I mean, she can be one of those amazingly irritating people, and she seems so remiss and dismissive of mainly her children.
Yes.
I think you could get over that if you don't discuss her children. You don't know anything. Even if you don't discuss the farm, you might find another common cause. You might like hiking or something. I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Stephen? Would you like an evening with Ruth?
I don't think she would be anywhere near my first choice.
Oh, no, but I know who your first choice would be. It would be Kate.
It probably would be Kate, yes. So Stella would be very good value, definitely. And I think there are probably a few others that would be okay. I must say I wouldn't want an evening with Neil. I think that would be really a bit dull.
No. I would love that.
Oh, my God. I would kiss that man's feet.
Me too. He's an icon. Stephen, that's it. You're out.
No, well, that's not, I think that given that all three of you want to dominate, want to monopolise Neil, it would be a disaster if I were there and any of you turned up, you'd immediately move in. So no, that's absolutely fine.
Now I know who you really want to have an evening with, Helen.
No.
Actually, it wasn't me that suggested that. It was in the chat. Glyn suggested that. So thank you, Glyn, for giving me an idea.
Pat might be worth an interesting conversation, getting back to her days as a pioneer, as Clary described it, or bra-burning radical, as Susan put it. I think there's probably somewhere deep within Pat, there is that Greenham Common protester, that radical that has been sort of ground down by decades of making soup out of misshapen vegetables. So I think that she would be... Kirsty would be fantastic as well, I think. I think I would probably have a lot to talk to Kirsty about, preferably without Rex, because he's just a bit dull.
Wet.
I like Rex.
Yeah. No, he didn't do anything for me at all.
I always had a soft spot for Rex, particularly against flashy old Toby.
Yeah.
In about sort of 2 years after we met them, when I finally learned to differentiate between one and the other, it took a long time. But then I learned that there was reliable Rex and terrible Toby, and then that's how I remembered them. And
good.
I've got a lot more time for Rex than I do have for Toby.
Very good. Now, as we talked about Bridge Farm, Bridge Farm Dairy is the home of Borsetshire Blue and Sterling Gold and has been front and centre recently. A bit too much in my opinion, but that's me. But that's not the only producer of food in this corner of South Borsetshire. Now, if one of your friends was going to visit Ambridge and asked you what food item they should bring you from the local area, what would you ask for? Cara?
It had to be lemon drizzle cake. I'm a huge fan of lemon drizzle cake, and it is, of course, iconic and infamous and synonymous with Ambridge. I'm guessing that it would have to be a slice from the bull now, hoping that Fallon has that on the menu there. I don't want to be setting foot inside the tea room. I accept that it's very, very clean. It's more about who actually owns the tea room, is why I wouldn't set foot in that particular door. So I think it would have to be a slice of a takeaway or a slice of lemon drizzle cake smuggled in a napkin in a pocket for me.
I think you'd probably ought to arrange for your friend to go there during the flower and produce show, because then you'd have the opportunity to get the original, the true, the one and only lemon drizzle cake as made by Jill Archer.
But if my friend was going there during the flower and produce show, I would have to go as well. I'm a huge fan of the flower and produce show. I'd be hoovering them all up.
Very much. Our local show's back this year. It's had a bit of a hiatus, and the bit at the end is great when they auction off all of the exhibits.
Oh, fantastic. That's brilliant. What about you, Stephen? What would you go for? Would you ask your friend to bring you back?
I'm going to go for something which has not been mentioned for a long time yet. It's coming up to Easter, it's spring. It's time for eating roast lamb, or slow-cooked lamb, or lamb done in many different ways, or even mutton. So I'm going to say I would like a decent piece of Hassett Hills lamb, which I think is probably going to be from Brookfield sheep grazed on home farm land.
Very nice too. Yes. What about you, Claire?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so all the meat's off. I
hope it's not.
I wouldn't mind some cheese, but again, I'm a bit loath to support Bridge Farming anyway because they've just got my back up so much. I'm also a bit of a fan of Fallon's cake, but Cara's already nabbed that. So maybe a bottle of wine from Lower Loxley Vineyards?
Yeah,
nice.
That sounds nice. Yeah, we don't hear much about the wine production these days, do we? Who's in charge of that at Lower Loxley?
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Elizabeth controls everything, doesn't she?
Yeah, but she doesn't seem to talk about anything much.
Maybe it's what Lewis is doing these days.
Oh, you and your obsession with Lewis. He's obsessed, that man.
Actually, Claire, if you didn't want to support Bridge Farm but you wanted cheese, how about Cordwell Cream?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that.
Oh right, yeah. Go to the rival cheesemaker.
Yes, possibly made from Bridge Farm milk that she bought cheaply from Helen.
Yeah.
Waste production. Yeah, I'd have a great deal of difficulty because I'm not a sweet fan at all. So cakes and things. So it's lemon drizzle cake. I suppose you could count it. It's got lemon in, so it could be one of your 5 a day. But that's about the limit for me. Yeah, it would be cheese for me, or the lamb sounds wonderful. I love lamb, especially at this time of the year. But of course, there's beef produced by David, isn't there?
Yes.
and Brookfield. But the one thing I would avoid, and when you listen to yesterday's DumTeeDum, it would be the sausages from Sausage Boy, Tom, because Chris from Indiana tells us in his email a very gruesome story about sausage making in India. Indiana. So no, I'm not a fan of sausages and mixed meat things anyway. But so I think what everybody else has said. Well, the lamb, the bottle of wine sounds more like it, really, for me. There's local gin, though. Just remember, it's the Scruff gin.
Yes, there is.
There is Scruff gin,
So
yes.
that's it. I've decided that's it. Scruff gin.
In the chat, somebody has suggested Susan Carter's chili.
Oh, I'm sorry, my husband has a heart condition.
You could combine that with the previous question about a night in the pub, and instead of going for a night in the pub, you go round to Ambridge View for an evening of chili with Susan and Neil.
Now, that's a question for another time, isn't it? Because we asked that to join DumTeeDum Facebook page. We do ask questions, and one of the questions is, who would you most like to eat? Which family would you most like to eat with? Now, as always, at the time when we've got academic archers happening, a lot of people because we talk about, you very kindly talk about DumTeeDum quite a lot, and a lot of people go off and find us on Facebook. So we've had a flurry of requests, and I think quite often what happens is people suggest joining the Facebook group to other people, but we've got this kind of silly, but we've had so many problems in the past with robots joining or whatever. So we have these several very easy questions which really show that you do actually know what the Archers is about. And one of the questions is, who would you like to most have dinner with? So if people are suggesting to other people to join our Facebook page, we'd really, really be grateful if you would answer the questions. Otherwise, we're obliged to turn you down because we're trying to prove that you're a real person. So sorry about that. It's a bit of a business on the side, but it's lovely. We love as many people as possible, and especially people who are going to be active on the Facebook group. So
let's go back to the reason we're here, which is conference. And this year, for various good reasons, it was decided to have it as an online conference. And a lot of that is to do with the sheer risk of holding an in-person conference. And if people don't turn up, then somebody ends up hugely out of pocket, and that somebody is probably going to be Cara, who is front and centre in all of this. But I think part of the arrangements for this year is to help raise a bit of money towards an in-person conference next year. And is the plan to try and go back to Warwick for that one, which was the original plan for this year?
It is. It will be our 11th year of existence and our 10th year of doing a conference. And so the plan would be to go to Warwick. It's a beautiful campus. It's really green and spacious and has all sorts of wonderful food options. The accommodation with it is all lovely. And the one thing that we really like about going to a university is that it can offer us, more often than not, the accommodation and the conference all in the one place. We're all there together for the whole weekend, and it's lovely. But, the cost of putting on a conference is, we will never get it less than £15,000. It's more likely around 20 to 22. And we're not a limited company. We're a group of volunteers, just as we all are that do Archers things like this. And so it is a huge risk. And just knowing what the financial climate is like at the moment for all of us, in whatever relative way, we decided this year to go to online, and for that to be a bit of really putting some money in the kitty. So when it comes to that conversation with Warwick, we've actually got the money to put down as a deposit, and we can use whatever we can to keep the cost of those tickets down. We keep them really at cost, but just to try and shave off whatever money we can from that. And we've probably raised around 3,500 from this weekend, which is just absolutely brilliant. And a lot of people, and I guess this is another highlight of the conference, we've had about 27 people buy a ticket to say pay it forward for somebody else so that they can join online, which is just so generous. A huge thank you to them for doing that. But yes, the plan is to be back at Warwick next year. We've just got a few things to iron out with them, just last bits of date setting and things like that. So we hopefully be able to get those dates out pretty soon.
And if there are any other things that you want to do between now and then in the way of fundraisers, obviously we will use the pulpit that is DumTeeDum to publicise that and get as much support as possible, because I think it's absolutely essential that Academic Archers does keep going, and because it provides such a valuable service. Now, this year's headline event, I think, was probably the conversation with Kerry Davis and Liz Johns, the two script writers. What would each of your dream headliners be for an in-person event? So an hour towards the end of the first afternoon. Cara.
Stephen Fry. I think. My God, would it just be an hour? Could we just all just sit down in a room and just listen to him talk about the Archers for the whole of a day. I think he would give such a rounded, analysis of what's happening in Ambridge, and he's got the really long memory of it as well. So I think in that sense, he's the absolute perfect guest to have, and he can hit our serious notes well, and also those times when we're laughing. I mean, predominantly maybe at ourselves, but he can hit those notes as well. So I think he'd be an absolute joy to have in the room with us.
Claire, what would you like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I also had Stephen Fry on my shortlist. I think any of the people who are in the public eye and also happen to be massive Archers fans. And what I love about the Archers is it's like a little hidden language. Suddenly you find out that someone likes the Archers, and it's like in a work context or out and about. And it's like you suddenly have this access to a kind of whole level of conversation. And it's a bit like, people I've seen at work, I don't know, talk about football or something, which I know nothing about. Like they have whole mechanisms for conversation, whereas it's just a tiny thing sometimes that unlocks a whole realm of shared experience, which I find really valuable. So I really enjoy it when you find out people that you've heard of are also fans of the Archers. And obviously DumTeeDum's got a great kind of history of having brought some of those people into the programme over the years. So that is one. I mean, before the change of government, I'd been really keen for Ed Miliband and Tim Vercelotti to do something about political engagement in the Archers, because I think that would have been quite fun. But in general, there are another session that I would really like to see. As you know, I'm something of a fan of maps, and there's been multiple Ambridge maps over the years. They don't all agree. Stephen's quite a stickler for understanding which things are above or below the river or next to each other or not. And so I'd really love to see a proper Ambridge geographer talk us through the iterations of the map and maybe give us a definitive. At that time, we had a new definitive map, I think, that would show exactly, for example, where Joy's living and things like that. So, I'd love to see a kind of a live action redrawing of the Ambridge map. That the session we had last year around the canals of Dorsetshire was particularly interesting and instructive on this. So we need to build in the waterway where Rex's boat is moored. Maybe we could just start from scratch with the basics and then redo the Ambridge map in a live session with a cartographer. That would be great for me. You
made a really good point there, Claire. We had, in our first ever conference, we did have a geographer come in and talk about the maps, and they had a big geology background as well. And they said, somebody really needs to know that this river has changed course dramatically within 50 years. This is unheard of. But I think you're absolutely right, because the more we hear and the richer this world becomes, even that map from 10 years ago, we've got new people moved in, new things have been mentioned. So it does need that updating. I wonder if we could get a scribe in, just one of those, brilliant people that annotate things as you're at a conference or a meeting, and get them to start working on it. That would be a really great thing to do through the day.
And a great academic Archers fundraiser, because I'm sure there are dozens of people out there who would like an up-to-date. I know Stephen and I would have them straight away, wouldn't we?
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've got one of the maps, but a new one would be lovely.
Yeah.
Well, when I did my embroidery map for the piece of fabric that we produced, it was actually from one of Stephen's maps that he sent me a photo of that I copied. So very much out of date map, but yeah, fascinating. And as you say, the canal map, the canal talk last year was fabulous for connecting through to those maps. Yeah, so maybe that's a project for the next year, is to get people on board for more maps or a more up-to-date map of Ambridge. So
it's probably something that Kerry would have views on.
To needlework, Jacqueline, just like we did the signatures in the Birmingham event.
Yeah, that was a good thing. I still can't remember the name of the lady who I eventually sent the thing to, who won it. But I hope she's not really feeling that she's been lumbered with a large piece of my mother-in-law's old linen sheet with lots of signatures. But it was a very much a joint effort, and people really got on board. So you did your first cross stitch for it, didn't you, Stephen?
Yes, it wasn't a brilliant piece of work, but it was an experiment.
It was a very good
Lovely.
counted cross stitch, which was very relevant to Ambridge. You did very well. I think you even did it on an Atlantic flight.
Yes, was it transatlantic? It was a long flight somewhere.
Yeah.
In the chat, when it comes to headline names and big names, Ruth Jones seems to be one of the top calls. I think Jane has said that she's been on the One Stiletto in the Grave podcast.
Yeah.
Angela Barnes is another one who's been mentioned. I would add to the list, and I don't know whether anybody has mentioned her in the chat, which is Charlotte Higgins, who does the Guardian monthly roundup and is just good value on everything.
She's fantastic, isn't she? And Charlotte, she's always, we've had conversations with her over the years, and we did ask her if she would come along to this year's, but she's actually overseas this particular week, so she couldn't make it. So yes, that is noted for next year.
Jolly good.
Where are we going?
I think we've finished the few notes that we made about this. So, and we're also coming up to almost an hour. No, three-quarters of an hour. So we've got a bit more time to chat if people want to. We'll try and keep an eye on the chat to see what questions people would like to ask you particularly. But is there anything you want to say about the current storylines? We'll start with Claire. Drop you in the hot oil.
Oh, crikey. Well, I did say that, and then I didn't chip in about kind of Bridge Farm employment practices. I think, to be fair, they have kind of tried with a kind of process, but, as a former union rep, I was like, I don't really understand what's going on here. But anyway, I am predisposed to find Helen pretty detestable, and I was quite grateful when Helen got over all of the drama, with Rob, and I could start happily hating her again, because I've never been a big fan. I put it aside while all the Rob drama was going on, and then I picked it up again. So I'm finding Bridge Farm quite hard work. And yeah, there's so many obvious better solutions to the Bridge Farm quandary. But the whole of Bridge Farm, it's like,
it's a black hole.
It's an omni-shambles of farm management, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Tom, Tom's got wetter and wetter. Natasha's got spikier and spikier, and then she's hiding stuff, I'm sure. Pat and Tony seem to be falling out. Well, there used to be more of one mind. Helen, I don't know. Anyway, to be fair, Henry, who has all the reason in the world to be the most screwed up of all of them, actually could well prove to be the most stable and sensible Bridge Farm archer of all of them. And that would be quite nice in some ways, because it would certainly be a kind of challenge to what we were all expecting. So, that's something that I would reflect on at the moment. But I could do without so much Bridge Farm, if I'm perfectly honest. I find it quite a difficult place to hang out.
Cara, what
How
have
about
you
you,
been
Cara?
loving or hating?
Yeah, I think there's so many different angles you can take on seeing a demise of Bridge Farm here, and also their housing situation as well. Will they be able to afford to buy Beechwood because of X, Y, and Z that Natasha might be hiding, and what would that mean? And then if the farm tanks, how long will that be played out over? It's just... I never really thought you'd be seeing the demise of one of the anchor farms, but maybe we actually are here, and I'm finding that really interesting. I can't get my head around. I can't get my head around Joy and Rochelle.
Yeah, that would have been my comment.
Yeah, I'm finding that fascinating. My partner's a psychotherapist, and they're one of those Archers listeners that protests that they hate it, but funnily enough has opinion on absolutely everything. But we were listening to that Friday episode and just like, what? is going on? And Kerry had it absolutely right about, we've got two narrators here that are saying two sort of contrary things, but also they're both saying those things very emphatically. So we're the Mick in this situation, sort of playing this table tennis between the two contrary positions. And I think I was sort of thinking yesterday, like, you know, where is the truth in this? It's going to lie somewhere in the middle and so forth. But then I thought, but maybe we're never going to find out the truth of this. And maybe that's what the script writers are going to just keep us going with this, that we're never going to know, because they're obviously really complex characters. And this is their relationship set up all their life. Why should it suddenly come to some sort of nice, clean conclusion or whatever, just for the sake of us as the listener? But I'm baffled by it and addicted to this particular storyline.
Yeah, I agree.
Me too. Carrie made that point about two unreliable narrators going on in this, and I was listening very carefully when we had the omnibus listen along today. The point about how long Joy had been away for, when she said it was a couple of days, Rochelle's actual lines were, "It was most of the summer holidays, I reckon." And she slipped that "I reckon" in at the end, and I thought that was probably telling that she either can't remember, or more likely she is trying to make it sound more than it was. I'm quite happy to believe it's more than just a couple of days, but I think each of them, if you listen very, very carefully, you will find clues to the extent to which they're not being absolutely, strictly accurate with the truth and with what's going on. And I don't think there is a real answer necessarily. I mean, yes, you could go back to the mid-90s and there would have been a day when Joy left and a day when she came back. But in a way, that doesn't matter anymore, because what matters is what's in their heads and what it means to the relationship between the two of them. And we're never... So it's appropriate, perhaps, that they each have a different figure, a different length of time in their minds, because it's what's in their minds that is affecting them going forward, rather than what is, what actually happened 30 years ago. And it occurs to me, we had a discussion about how old Rochelle is, and if she isn't 15 in the mid-90s, then she must be 40 something by now, because it's 25 years on since there. So she's 40 plus the however long in the 90s between the mid-90s when it happened and 2000. So Rochelle must be over 40, I think.
And she's got teenage children, so she must be in her 40s. And
did she spend any time with them recently, like she said she did?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I mean, she's like, "Oh yeah, we had a great time." Or was it? We went swimming, we watched a film, we had a burger, or whatever. It was just like, it's like, you know, on Family Fortunes, name some things you might do with your estranged children on a day out. And it's just like the absolute kind of tick box things. Right, think about things you might do with some teenagers if you were just visiting. And it's like those things, and they might have done those things, but it just felt too obvious somehow. So yeah, I'm dubious, because I'm not sure how much she does see those children at all. And this whole dynamic about what does parenting mean for Joy and Rochelle is absolutely fascinating.
Very much so.
You know, because Joy's got so much guilt and stuff around it that there's something going on. And I'm feeling a bit sorry that Joy's falling off her perch, to be honest, because it's only a couple of years since we were in Birmingham and I gave a speech that basically said, "Be more Joy." I mean, that was my final line.
It was.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
I was like, I thought she was absolutely brilliant. I've been a massive supporter of Joy. I think she's done, she's really inveigled into the village and settled in well. And yet, she's definitely falling off that perch right now. And, we're all human, so maybe it's not safe on the perch, but I'm really, given the amount of empathy she shows to everybody else, it's curious how she lacks some of that for herself and for Rochelle.
Yeah.
But that can be quite a common thing with some parents. And you see, the child at whatever age might see the parent being an ideal parent outside of the family situation, but not inside the situation. And that can obviously build up quite a lot of sort of seething resentment with that. Like, if you can be with them like that, why can't you with us? And particularly when Joy came back and go, oh my God, Constanza, isn't that such a shame? I'm not sure what the truth of the dead dog situation is there, but you could feel like, Rochelle was like, you what now? Come on. What
Absolutely.
was, you're saying that there. And it's interesting, be more Joy. We've had this long-standing mystery about Joy and Joy's background. And that was always based on what she wasn't actually saying, that she was withholding something, not lying, but she wasn't saying the whole of a story. Now we're having that doubt put in our own minds of actually what is she been saying intentionally that is obscuring a particular truth. And this is the pleasure and the pain of being a listener to the Archers, and we're sat in this really, really uncomfortable position here.
I wonder whether there's a conference paper, which I would certainly not be in a position to write, comparing two impactful incomers, Linda in the 80s and Joy in the last decade, because I think there are lots of things about them they have in common, including an interest in taking on the pantomime, for instance. And yet they come with very different backgrounds. Linda came in fairly much determined to turn Ambridge into Sunningdale, and always going on about how things were done in Ambridge weren't done properly. I mean, it was very much a Lucia type of figure. Joy has come in, I think, much more trying to fit in with the village, and yet still having an impact despite that. And I guess her accent is probably more alien to villagers than a fairly generic southern posh accent, which is what Linda has got. And they've just, now that we get to know them more, Linda has mellowed into a national treasure. Joy started off on course to be a national treasure, particularly the interaction with Ben when he had his psychotic episode. And I think that was just before the Birmingham conference, wasn't it? So that was one of the things that made us think that Be More Joy made so much sense. But now it's become so much more complicated and murkier. And would you really trust Joy with your psychotic child, given what she has done to Rochelle, or what she and Rochelle have done to each other? So I think there's an interesting contrast there between two people who, as I said, they're both incomers, but they're both intending to settle. And in the case of the Snells, they're almost accepted as villagers these days, the Snells. And few people now treat them as incomers the way that I think Joe did.
Yeah, and I think what I put the comment in the earlier conversation today was actually there's a contrast with the Maliks, because actually, to be fair, Joy started out, her very first scene was complaining about the mud on the road from the farms. Yeah. And she hit the backs up of all the local families, and then she was a bit too try-hard and annoyed everyone and was too chatty. So she wasn't popular to start with, and then she became more integrated. Whereas the Maliks, I mean, obviously, Az was a GP, and that's a very important role in a village. So, you've already got a foot in the door there. But actually, apart from a very brief kind of interaction with people that's a bit tetchy, I think both Zainab and Khalil have turned out to be quite a bit of, rather gems. And now, oh gosh, what's his name? The husband is shown up in a week. Akram, and he's shown up in a week, and he's kind of fixing stuff and moving stuff around. He's the new Robert in terms of being handy around the village. And all we need to do now is find out that he's some absolute cricket hotshot and he'll win the season for them. And suddenly they're right in there, which is incredibly unusual for an incoming family, to be perfectly honest. And, I'm really interested to see how this dynamic plays out. When will the halo fall from the Maliks?
Yeah, so there's an interesting contrast between the Maliks on the one hand and the Gills on the other. Now, I was greatly satisfied when we got the names of the Gills, and they turned out to be Gujarati or from Punjabis, from that part of the world, because I'd sort of suggested that right at the very beginning when other people were suggesting that Gill was a very solid Yorkshire name. But we were promised, I think Jeremy Howe teased a story involving the Gills a couple of months ago, and I suspect that was the house sitting that he had in mind. But we have these two Asian families one of whom has come in late and become very active, and the others are sitting there. But interesting, nobody's talking about the fact that there are two Asian families in Ambridge, which I think would be the topic of conversation in any real rural village. Not to mention, I mean, after all, Usha was quite controversial when she first arrived, but maybe that was because she was a Hindu married to the vicar.
Yeah, and Shula was involved in all that, so it's all very high horsey.
Right.
Well, the Gills have kept themselves to themselves, though, haven't they? Well, or actually, maybe not, because they've obviously been chatting to Mick in the car park at Lower Loxley or wherever it is.
But there's something interesting in that, isn't it? Because I can remember we were talking about when the house was sold, and who would come in, and would it actually go to what is a very large part of a rural, demographic, is those that just come from London for the weekend, or those that just have it, as their base, but they're very much active with their work and socially elsewhere. And that seems to be the model for the Gills. And certainly from my little anecdotal experience of that, they're kind of just like, well, the village just forgets about them in a way. It's like they're off doing their other thing, and they're a little bit sort of out of people's radar for a bit. I wonder if there's a bit of that going on with them as well. But I would love to hear from them. And obviously, they're socialising in the village, but it's at Grey Gables. That puts them in a very different sort of social sphere than the Malicks would anyway as well.
And Stella must have dealings with the Gills because she's driving heavy machinery past their house on a daily basis, because they are still sitting there right on the edge of all the land that is being run by Stella, owned by Brian. And Home Farm, as a farm, is still going strong and is a highly industrialised farm. All the outbuildings are close to Home Farm House.
And also, they go to the swimming pool of the health centre, but they've got their own swimming pool at Home Farm. So
it's a very small one, isn't it?
Well, who knows what they've done to that swimming pool? Maybe that's not there anymore.
Maybe it's full of the Albion kitchen.
Yeah. You'd have thought as well, if Stella's going past on a tractor, that Lillian would have cottoned on to this and said, can you at least try and get some photos of the second floor for us, please?
Oh, Lillian and her snooping. That's yet again another story to discuss at another time.
The thing is, Stella isn't a gossip.
No.
Stella will probably know the Gills quite well, but she won't actually talk about them to other people. Probably not even Pip, except very exceptionally. And then Pip's not particularly gossipy either. So you've actually got the wrong people in contact with the Gills to find out anything about them. Although they do occasionally go into the shop, because didn't Susan say something about them having been in the shop? So all we know about the Gills really are from what Mick knows, the bit that we've seen inside the house recently, and then whatever Susan shares about interactions in the shop. But I get the feeling that they're not especially open about what's going on in their lives.
Well, I take that as raising the challenge that when I go and have my night out with Stella, to get her tipsy enough to try and get some gossip out of her.
I think you'll get on very well, Cara. I think you'll really get that sorted. You're definitely the sort of person who would be able to squeeze information out of Stella. The wallpaper colours, as if anybody would be interested. Well, Lillian would be.
I think just going back to that point about the Gills possibly being Londoners who, or possibly people based in some other city who come there for the weekend. It's surprising how few people in Ambridge how few houses in Ambridge seem to be in that way. Because when I lived in the village, and this was admittedly 30 years ago, that was very Ambridge-like, and in that part of the world, about a third of the houses, and particularly the older, bigger ones, the more attractive houses, were owned on that basis. And some of them were still very active in the village and would turn up for the village cricket team and were accepted as that. But it was definitely the case that the village did have a large non-resident during the week population. Mm-hmm. And it's really quite surprising that Ambridge isn't like that if it's as pretty as it's supposed to be. And I know it's not quite Lower Slaughter or Bourton on the Water, but I think it is supposed to be quite an attractive place, and it's got Lower Loxley nearby, it's got a posh hotel in the shape of Grey Gables and so on. There are all kinds of reasons why it might be, and it hasn't got a school, so it's sort of not necessarily going to be attractive to families with young children, even if there's any affordable housing. And I guess, well, I'm hitting one of Claire's hot buttons, I suspect, by mentioning affordable housing in Ambridge.
I think there aren't as many holiday lets as you might expect either. Like these days, it's not so much it is second homes, but actually it's people who've bought somewhere. Obviously, we haven't had anything come vacant. Wouldn't it set the cat among the pigeons if Helen's house or Kirsty's house, everything falls through and someone buys it for an Airbnb? Because then poor Joy and Mick, assuming Joy's still there, will have to deal with a parade of different people coming and going, hen parties and all sorts of random stuff. And everyone will get their backs up, and it will undermine the fact that there aren't places available for local families in the village. But that's absolutely a true to life reflection of what happens in these kinds of places. And literally, I don't do this myself. I went away for a weekend in the Cotswolds with some friends a couple of weeks ago. We stayed in a nice 4-bedroom house on a new estate just on the edge of the Cotswolds, which someone had bought specifically for the purpose of letting out as a holiday let. It was clearly never anybody's home as such. It was set up as a holiday let. And that's a house that, someone in their family could have been living in. So, I'll set my own wrist for that one. But, it's a reality of these sorts of places.
Yes, maybe that's what Nightingale Farm is now, because there's a place that used to be quite important because that was where Mrs. Antrobus used to live. That has completely disappeared from discussion, and maybe that's why, because there's nobody actually living there and it's just a holiday let. And there are probably several other properties that haven't been mentioned for a long while that are like that.
Well, properties that are not mentioned, we used to have a wedding barn, a wedding venue at Lower Loxley.
The Cruck Barn, yes. No, I think it's still mentioned.
Doesn't get mentioned, though, does it?
It does for Deck the Halls, I think. They tend to do things there. So.
It's another Lewis project, Stephen, for you.
I hope Rex's pigs are quite far away. I'm not sure I want to get married in a stately home and have pigs ruffling around too close by.
Could bring good luck, Claire.
They're rooting around by Nigel's old treehouse, I think, which I still think is where Rex ought to go and live.
Probably better than a barge boat. Longboat.
A leaky barge boat.
So a longboat would be a bit more Viking, I think.
Sorry. Sometimes I forget words.
So I think we're just about coming to time on this. So I just want to say thank you very much, Cara and Claire, for coming to join us. I'd like to say thank you to the audience for listening and for contributing in the chat, which we've had a chance to get a little bit of a discussion from. I think that most of the first part of the chat was reminiscences about old department stores. And I don't know whether there's any way of saving the chat from this, so it may just disappear into the ether when we finish our recording. But I'm going to hit stop, and then I think we will at that point lose the audience. But thank you all for coming, and this will appear as a podcast at some point in the next week once I've had a chance to edit it and fit it around my work trip to Belgium. So
thanks for having
you
us.
all.
Thank you.
Bye.